Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at in the country. To start off here, I'll be discussing the Connected Fleet Challenge. Blaine touched on this and hinted at it. So what the Connected Fleet Challenge is, it's to build off of the SPAT Challenge. So the core foundation of it is to encourage infrastructure owner operators that have already responded and completed the SPAT Challenge to move on to the next phase and equip at least one light duty and at least one heavy duty vehicle with an onboard unit, a 5.9 gigahertz DSRC onboard unit by 2021. With this, then you'd be looking at that onboard unit doing some basic function, broadcasting out the basic safety message to a roadside unit, and receiving the SPAT and MAP message back and any other data messages that could be coming out of that infrastructure. The big focus of the SPAT challenge was trying to get quantity to show commitment, to get experience, and really build out those corridors. The fleet challenge is slightly different in the sense that it's not necessarily quantity, but it's diversity is the focus. So different makes, models, years of vehicles, different types of vehicles, so that we can share those across the industry. So what is the Connected Fleet Challenge needed for? It's a couple things. Trying to get fleet owners experience procuring, deploying, operating onboard units so that they can prepare for the future, just like what you would do with the SPAT challenge. The fleet owners and infrastructure owner operators will benefit from real world trials of this, try out different things, whether it be red light violation warnings, eco glide path, other applications that you can do that you can just take and information coming out of the SPAT message and correspond that to the onboard unit. And also, infrastructure owner operators that participate in the SPAT challenge, it allows them to have a mechanism to perform additional verification of the broadcasts and their actual deployments that they have in the field. So there's a scale of the fleet challenge, as I mentioned. Public sector fleet owners aren't generally ready for a wide-scale deployment. And there's several reasons for this. One, of course, funds are limited, and a lot of places are starting to take a wait-and-see approach, trying to see how pilots go and observing other sites. But that's not a reason why you can't just do something from a smaller scale. Also, because there's limited experience, at least from the public sector side, with operating onboard units versus looking at roadside units so far. Looking at the different vehicle types, there's a lot of uncertainty about operating costs and any type of institutional challenges that go along with that over a long scale time period. So there's a need for an initiative to really help out the operators gain this experience and position themselves so that in the future you can have those large scale deployments. So that is where we're looking at for the Connected Fleet Challenge. So as I mentioned, diversity is the goal of the Connected Fleet. Ideally, we want to have a variety of makes and models configurations of both light duty and heavy duty vehicles. Each fleet operator does not need to deploy each of every variation. That's where the lessons learned and sharing comes into play. So if someone's actually deploying an onboard unit in a Mack truck, a 2018 Mack truck, well, that just makes it that much easier for someone who's looking at that and saying, I can just already build off of someone. They already did it with a Mack truck of this make and model. And while the SPAT Challenge tracks locations where the broadcasts are actually occurring, the Connected Fleet Challenge will likely track the variations of maintenance vehicles, buses, delivery vehicles, a variety of different types with onboard units equipped for sharing lessons learned for each variation. When we start looking at transit buses, for example, if 10 transit agencies each equip 2 of their buses, this could result in as many as 20 different models and configurations of buses versus having to go through and each one having to do this. And as we go through and tracking things on the website and through all the resources that we'll have there, we can document the lessons learned, the costs, installation experiences, anything that can be reported or tracked along with these deployments. To the industry, of course, this will still represent a substantial portion of different types of vehicles on the road. So we won't necessarily have the quantity once again, but we can say this makes it easier for a mass deployment when you start to figure out, I already know how to do it for this make and model because someone else has done it. It gets that much easier to do a deployment. Additionally, if several school bus fleets participate, this could result in understanding of institutional and legal steps required to equip school buses onboard units, an area where a lot of people have hesitation when starting looking at technology. So the target goals of the Fleet Challenge, once again, are to equip at least 2 of your fleet vehicles, 1 heavy duty, 1 light duty, to support the challenge. Fleet operators can collaborate with other fleets to try and get as much diversification in the vehicles equipped as possible nationwide. So perfect example is Blaine out in Utah working with their local transit authority and doing their work with their SPAT deployment. So with that, that's, the DOT does not actually own the transit vehicles, but working with the transit provider, that's a perfect example of operators collaborating together. And then fleet operators can partner with infrastructure owner operators too to deploy SPAT and map broadcasts to exchange data. So we just look at this as a way to leverage and keep progressing existing deployments that we have. So of course it builds on the SPAT and the SPAT challenge, because you can use it to ensure that the SPAT and map messages are being properly transmitted. It allows for demonstrations of other applications. And then you have vehicles are also challenged to broadcast out the basic safety message, allowing the DOT to understand how to receive and process that type of data coming in, which is going to be a big function going forward in the future. Of course, there's benefits to both infrastructure owner operators and OEMs. From the infrastructure owner operator side, having experience installing, lessons learned, technical experiences, they can test the CV applications. You can test onboard units and roadside units, interoperability, and opens the door for more day one applications. And from the OEM standpoint, it still increases market penetration. There's some safety benefits depending on the type of vehicles that are equipped. For example, if we're equipping snow plows or truck mounted attenuators, crash trucks or paint trucks, these are vehicles that are on the roadway right now that there's some intrinsic safety benefits of knowing where they're at. So that would be appealing to an OEM, just so that if you put it into a vehicle, at least someone driving that vehicle can know that there's some sort of operation up ahead. It can also help out with developing aftermarket devices, and it continues to show support for the GSRC deployments. One of the things we also wanted to make sure is that the beauty of the SPAT challenge was that it was a simplistic approach. It was pretty easy to understand. You could do a simple elevator speech and it would get across the reason why you wanted to do this. Well, it could be the same here for the SPAT or for the Connected Fleet Challenge. You can't have vehicle to infrastructure without the vehicle. So as public sectors, we're working really hard right now on the I side of it. Now we're starting to say, okay, let's step back and also look at what we need to do to get the V side of it until we actually start to see more of a market penetration and more of a mass deployment from the OEM standpoint. It also allows for more and more pilot deployments popping up. Connected fleets is just a fraction of the current size right now. We have far more infrastructure equipped than we do fleets. And unlike the SPAT challenge, that's focused predominantly on DOTs and municipalities that own traffic signals, the Connected Fleet Challenge has opened up to more than just DOTs. From a logistics standpoint, partnerships between fleet operators and OEMs operating a SPAT challenge broadcast make sense. The fleet operators will equip the vehicles, and then they can work with the infrastructure owner operators to test and verify receipt of messages to make sure you have that proper communication between infrastructure. And the infrastructure owner operators can partner and test and verify everything's properly being broadcast, and they can then, and of course, ingest the basic safety message and everything that goes along with that. And as I mentioned, this is more than just DOTs. This you can start to get into maintenance fleets, taxi fleets, transit fleets, emergency responders. You can start open this up to tolling authorities that don't have traffic signals, but it would make sense for them to start looking at other applications that can tie into their day-to-day operations with this challenge. So just similar to the SPAT challenge, there is a connected fleet page on the National Operations Center of Excellence website. So this is the homepage for it, provides some general information. You have an ability there, you'll see on the side, where you can add your fleet to the map. So there's some general information that we ask. Some is required, some is optional, but basic information of contact and information on actual deployments. Does it tie back into a SPAT deployment? Eventually, we will have a website map. I mentioned this, it's not live yet, but you'll have the ability to filter. So you can see you can filter by agency type, vehicle type, applications, makes and models, and you can do multiple filters on top of that. So you can do a couple of those all at once. So you can really dive down to find out something that is applicable. Because as we mentioned at the start, since diversity is the key, you want to make sure that you don't have to equip all your vehicles. So you can easily find something through this resource site to line up with what you actually have within your fleet. So you can go and see if someone has this particular make or model or particular type of application that they've deployed. And of course, just like the SPAT challenge, we will have a resource section. We're already starting to pull together some resources here now. You'll actually have some resources from some of the speakers there to come up. So information's right there, readily available right now. And finally, just like this SPAT challenge, we need information. That's the biggest thing. It's a collective effort here. So any type of sample documentation you can provide for agencies to use, we would love to have that. Let us know, whether it be bid documents, cost information, lessons learned, or just general technical resources we can put it on the site. Let that be available to other people to share. And then, of course, we have it open right now. Please share any type of fleets that you're getting ready to equip or have equipped, so we can start putting on the map. We can start documenting things and now allow people then to actually use that resource to find the actual activities happening around the country. And with that, that's a quick overview of the Connected Fleet Challenge. We'll now be moving into more examples of actual testings that are occurring right now with onboard unit installations. So we wanted to just talk about Pennsylvania and what we're doing right now. As Blaine mentioned, we have a strong relationship with Carnegie Mellon University, and we were able to leverage that a lot for our early deployments. But as we started to move down the path, we realized that you can't just rely on an academic institution to always show up and be there readily available when you have to do any type of testing or any type of verification. So that's where we said to ourselves that from a PennDOT standpoint is, well, we need to equip a vehicle. We want to make sure that we comply with the SPAT or with the Connected Fleet Challenge. So how do we start to build into that? And that's where we're at right now. We're still in the early phases of what we're doing, but we've already started to develop some lessons learned. So our focus, we wanted to tie it into a existing SPAT deployment that we have. So this is a SPAT deployment that occurs in Harrisburg around our capital. So we have 8 signalized intersections right now broadcasting out. We chose to use one of our fleet vehicles. It is a Nissan Rogue, a 2018 Nissan Rogue is what we're going to be equipping and using. And right now, when we did our initial SPAT deployment, the way we did verification is we basically rigged up a spare roadside unit to function as an onboard unit. And that's what we use to actually verify message packages. But that's not exactly one-to-one the same as an onboard unit. You don't have 2-foot long omnidirectional antennas associated with an onboard unit when you're driving around. So we started to notice that by doing that approach, we were getting message sets different than what we would with a traditional onboard unit. So that's why we started moving towards the direction of, okay, let's start equipping our own fleet. So we already came into some challenge when we did our initial procurements. The big one is unlike RSUs where you have the 4.1 guidance that you could use as a foundation. Nothing was developed for onboard units from the feds. So with that, that's where we said, okay, let's start looking at other DOTs, other activities, the pilot deployments, trying to pull the stuff together to try and piecemeal together our own type of procurement document. And then this also tied back into that because we never did it before. How do you start dealing with something that's never been an approved products before? Trying to get more of a experimental exemptions. So we took an approach of using existing IT contracts. So we have some open-end IT contracts that we were able to leverage. There's some limitations to that. You can only buy in low volumes and low costs, less than $2,000 per unit, but that's perfect for initial initial deployment where you're only doing 1 or 2 vehicles. So we used the specifications from other states and cut sheets, and that's what we did going forward. But ultimately, we want to develop specifications in our own standards procurement documents. The other thing that we noticed once we started going through the procurement of onboard units, we tried to buy a couple from a variety of manufacturers. And we noticed that not all onboard units were made the same. And when you get one, it could be completely different than another. And unfortunately, we found out that there are some build quality concerns. So we actually had to send some onboard units back. We had devices that could not accept SSH login credentials. We had ones where once logged in, the enable password would not work, so we could adjust the configuration. One of the onboard units, the actual factory reset button, uh, it was not actually physically connected to the circuit board. It was just in there, no one connected it, so we couldn't actually reset it. We also, when we were going through this, one of the onboard units, we found out the antenna was basically held in place with what appeared to be just hot glue. Screws were nearly stripped. So it's one of those things where I think you're going to start to encounter that as you start going down this path, that you have to verify each and every onboard unit that you receive, that it meets the quality of what you're expecting. So that's not something that we were expecting when we went down this route. We figured you would hit some hiccups, but from only purchasing a handful here from a variety of manufacturers, we didn't think we'd be hitting that many bullet points of build quality concerns. When we did do initial tests, we found out there was failure between the communications, just because firmwares didn't line up exactly. One was one version ahead of the other, so we weren't getting any messaging. Even though that we thought we had the most up to date, being the brand new device, we still need to do firmware updates. We also found out that lack of documentation, and even from the vendor, there was a lot that we had to work with, trying to share information back and forth and building on that. We found interoperability to be an issue, even though with, say, the Lear, we have a rod around our capital, so we were using Lear to try and make sure that we had from the same similar manufacturer. We still had ample issues with roadside units and onboard units and preliminary tests properly communicating with each other. And then onboard units, we had issues with different makes and models where onboard units had issues sending and receiving messages because it was a different manufacturer. So trying to go through and adjusting and then trying to find the documentation to actually figure out how to make that work. Uh, we thought the technology was going to be the hard part. This might be the big one that we learned is the internal policy was just as big. So when we start looking at this, of course, we never done this before as a DOT, so we leverage consultant support helping us out here along the way. So we thought, okay, we can get the consultant to help us install. We found out that that can't be when they're actually putting anything on a state-owned fleet vehicle. It has to be done by actual DOT staff. There's policy associated with that. There's liability associated with that. So with that, we basically have to have it where the consultants will give a guided support as we go through, where we actually have maintenance staff actually doing the installation. We thought that that it would be pretty straightforward once we have it on, that we would have the vehicle, but because broadcasting information that comes out of onboard unit puts positioning with that, there was concern from a union standpoint. We had similar concerns when we did AVL and snow plows. So that limits who can use the vehicle without us going and actually getting permission from the union, because it puts out specific information so that someone could figure out where someone was at any given time. And there was concerns from a union standpoint. When we started thinking about how to have the human machine interface, we wanted flexibility. So we were looking at using an Android tablet. Unfortunately, we're more of an Apple shop for tablets. We found out that iPads are extremely locked down. So now it's trying to work through our IT folks and trying to get the permissions necessary and go down the path to actually go with Android, which is more open and allows us to do a variety of things. But without that, there's some security concerns. And then finally, when we start looking at the CAN bus, besides the what people are already familiar with, actually just coding information coming off that CAN bus is an issue in itself. When we start talking about trying to tie into it, our maintenance folks and our fleet management start raising concerns that based off of how we actually purchased the vehicle, there were concerns that it could potentially void the warranty of our vehicles. So they're going through a legal review right now to verify that is not the case. But that's just something that we never anticipated when we started going down this path. And with that, I believe that is my last slide, Patrick.